I think that's another thing is like we can say, hey, would you like to make a PR? But sometimes people don't even know what PR is. They're like, public relations? Like, what are you talking about?
Okay.
and uh, and so if you can make that a link to some resource, then you're enabling that person.
Hey everyone, this is the newest episode of my podcast, and today I have guests from the other side of the world. Hello Kent, it's I can't see Dodds. Can you say a couple of words about you?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. So yeah, just to introduce myself a little bit, my name is Kent C. Dodds. I work at PayPal as a full stack JavaScript engineer, both front end and back end. I spend more time on the front end just because I enjoyed that more, but do plenty of Node at PayPal. I also represent PayPal on the TC39, and so that's an experience. It's a lot of fun. I do a lot with open source stuff, doing some stuff for PayPal right now that's pretty exciting, and then just lots of side things, and I contribute to a lot of projects too. I'm also a teacher, so I have a ton of content on Egghead. I've got some on front-end masters. I'm a Google developer expert, and yeah, I'm happily married, father of 3, almost 4 kids next month.
Wow.
And so yeah, lots of stuff about me, I guess.
So I guess you are living on some other planet, because on this one we have just 24 hours per day. I have no idea how you actually managed to do so much stuff. Yeah, and because I have 2 kids, and I know that with the kids it's really difficult. I'm actually able to only do my daily job. I'm trying to open source stuff and work on side project, but it's really not happening. So yeah, how you manage to do so much stuff? Is there any secret, or you just don't sleep, or you don't eat?
Well, I've got some tips, I guess. So first off, just to do a couple disclaimers, I pretty much have no hobbies other than family, church, and work stuff. So
yeah, the same.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't really do a whole lot else other than that. And then I try to make as much of the stuff that I do public, so I don't do a whole lot of, at PayPal I definitely have a lot of source code in our app that I've written that is not public. But I try to, the stuff that I do on the side, like if I'm going to work on an open source project, I'll live stream it. So I generate a ton of content. And so it kind of gives the illusion that I do a lot more than anybody else, not that illusion, but more the illusion that I do as much as I do. But in reality, I'm doing just pretty much the same amount of stuff as everybody. I'm just, you can see all the stuff that I make. And so, yeah, there's that as well. But I try to make like as much of what I'm doing at work public and open source as possible. And so that's kind of something about me that might be a drawback for an employer is if I can figure out a way to take a story that I've been given and turn that into an open source project, then I will. And so that normally means that the end result will be better because open source software often is better documented and better tested and stuff. But at the same time, open sourcing something takes a little bit more time. So and spending the time to make something that's open sourceable, like documenting it well and everything, that also takes more time. So it's kind of a trade-off there. Is if you're going to have me on your team, then I'll probably try to open source the stuff that I'm working on. And that means it'll take me a little bit longer than if you just had somebody churning out code. But you're going to have a really good final product, hopefully. And And PayPal is really liking the open source stuff that I do for PayPal because, if I'm doing it for PayPal, it's going to be under the PayPal org, and that's good for PayPal. Both of my open source projects that I have built for PayPal, well, one of them is by far the most widely used project, including PayPal's Node SDK. It's the most popular open source JavaScript project that PayPal has. And then this other one that I'm working on right now hasn't been released yet, and it's already getting up there as one of the more popular ones. So PayPal likes that I do open source because it's good for PayPal. And so so it's actually some of it is part of my job, and so that also gives the illusion that I do a lot more than 24 hours in a day. And then also I spend a lot of time automating stuff. So I have a ton of my open source stuff automated, so I can do a lot more with the time that I have. So those are a couple of things.
I noticed that the hiring today is really difficult, and the companies are actually struggling to find people, and that's one of the approaches actually to open source something to become popular, and then people start liking the company. They want to work with these people which are building these cool things and so on.
It's like a recruiting mechanism for sure. I've definitely had people tell me that they're more interested in working for PayPal because of some of the things that I've been able to do. So that's for sure.
Okay. And you don't have this stopper to like publish something which is not ready? I guess you just throw stuff
Well, I don't open source everything. I try to make the things that I open source be useful, at least to somebody. So yeah, like there's definitely, and then there is a process at PayPal. So there are some open source projects that I built before I came to PayPal that I'm still contributing to, that PayPal is using. And so some of those things are under my username on GitHub, and I'll work on some of those things during work hours if we need those things to be better for some reason. And then but the stuff that I open source to solve a PayPal problem, that'll be under the PayPal org. But yeah, I don't open source everything. I try to make the stuff I open source be useful. But most of the stuff I work on, I try to make generically useful anyway. So lots of the stuff I work on is going to be open source.
Isn't it a kind of because I see the reason why like in this case you actually open source something, but then there's this process of the people adopting your software and they found bugs and stuff, and isn't it this taking too much time? I mean, like responding to issues and pull requests, and because I myself have like maybe 2 projects which are of course not that popular, but they have some issues, and I feel really bad because I can't respond on time. Sometimes it's like a next month I'm able to even just type something. So isn't it this too much actually to have this pressure to kind of respond to all these people on time and to fix everything?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely that pressure, and lots of people feel it, and that leads a lot of people to just give up on open source because they just can't take that. I don't deny that there's a little bit of pressure. But for me, if the issue that's reported is not affecting me personally, then it goes into this bucket of things that I do to be nice, and I only have so much time to devote to that bucket, and nothing in that bucket of things I do to be nice is going to trump things that are more important to me, like spending time with my family and working for my employer and stuff. So this is the first time I've used this analogy, but this metaphor, but it seems to work pretty well. It's like you take the things that don't actually impact you personally, and you put it into a bucket of things that you do to be nice, and then you forget about it until you are ready to devote some time to be nice. The other thing is sometimes these issues are like kind of showstoppers, like people just won't use your library because this issue exists. And I do want people to use my libraries because the funnel that gets people contributing to a project starts with people who are aware and then use your project. And so I'm interested in increasing the number of people who use my project because that'll increase the number of people who are interested in contributing. And my goal in every open source project is to eventually be able to hand it off to somebody else when I lose interest. And so I definitely want to build a community around all of my projects so that eventually I could hand it off if I'm not interested in maintaining it. And it's hard to hand it off if nobody's contributed to it before. So but even then, if you lose interest in a project and pretty much every issue is just going into your issues that I work on when I want to be nice, then like I would just say don't work on that project, and unless pretty much my rule is when a project ceases to bring me happiness, then I stop working on it. And somebody else, they can fork it, they can, I can hand over contribution rights or whatever. I don't really care. Just I'm happy to hand projects off. So as far as there's a project I'm working on right now called Downshift for PayPal. And it's an autocomplete drop-down select, multi-select thing. It's used to build those kinds of experiences for React applications. And it's not actually officially released yet. I'm waiting until we actually ship something with it at PayPal. But as I've been developing it, I've been getting a lot of issues and feedback and ideas, and those have been invaluable to me for creating the library. So there's that side of it as well. In that, sure, you do get these issues, but it's better that developers who are starting to use your library are catching those issues rather than your users catching them because you just committed this directly into your code base. No developer saw it, and your users catch these issues. So there's that side of it as well, that these issues are actually contributions. And I've got a whole other idea or topic around recognizing contributors to projects, but I'll just leave it at that.
Oh yeah, it's an interesting direction. I had 2-3 hours this weekend to just do something on my own, and I'm really thinking about building something for Redux, and I'm really thinking about this very often. Even at work, I'm thinking to kind of try this middleware and stuff. But when I check my inbox, I have this folder GitHub where I keep all the issues which I didn't respond. It was so big, so I was thinking, oh gosh, I have to respond to some of these issues. And then I kind of decided, okay, I'm just working on this boring stuff because I have to. People, they ask about help and I didn't respond. And I actually didn't work on the thing which I'm really interested right now. So I guess it's kind of difficult to find a balance.
Well, yeah, because you want to build a community, right? And you can't build a community without spending some time working with these people. Yeah, for sure. So I have, like I said, I automate as much as I can. And I have some snippets of text that I use pretty commonly for issues.
You auto respond with something?
Not auto respond, but I have some canned responses that I'll paste in and modify. And most of the time it goes something like this. Thank you so much for responding or for filing this issue. I appreciate it. If you could dig a little bit deeper and suggest a solution, that would be great. And then they most of the time they will. Sometimes they won't. They'll just leave it. And if they don't do anything, then what probably would have happened is you fix it and you say, hey, it's been fixed, and you never hear from them again. That happens often. So I say, hey, could you dig a little bit deeper and come up with a solution? And surprisingly, often people will do that. They'll look into your code and they'll realize, oh, this was actually just like a 2-line change right here. And that's like 15 minutes that you saved yourself. And then when they come back and they say, hey, here's a solution, then you say, awesome, how would you like to make a pull request to make that happen? And so often they do. And now you have somebody who knows the code base, at least a portion of it, who's contributed to the project. And then I have this all contributors thing. You'll see in the READMEs of most of my projects, my recent projects, have like a table that show all the contributors as a way to recognize people who have contributed to the project in any way. And so I'll have them add themselves to that list. And now all of a sudden I have somebody who filed an issue just kind of, half-heartedly or whatever, but they've investigated, they've contributed, and now their picture is on the README. That person is way more invested in the project than if I'd solved the problem myself. And so if there's something that I don't really care to have fixed personally because it doesn't really affect me right now, or I don't have time for it or whatever, then I can kind of offload that to somebody else. And if they don't fix it, then they obviously didn't care enough about it either. And so like in that scenario, who cares? Literally nobody cares. That's why it's not fixed. So or certainly, at least like certainly everybody cares. We don't want issues in our software, but nobody cares enough to fix it. And so that's the way that open source works. Is it's not my software, it's our software. And if it's not bothering me, then or at least if it's not bothering me enough to dedicate some time to fix the problem, then I shouldn't really have to fix the problem. Like I said, there are some times where, oh wow, this is a major bug. It's not really impacting me because I don't use it that way, but this is something that is like a foot gun or something. And I am really interested in building a community around this. So I'll still ask somebody else to fix it, but if they're not interested, then yeah, sometimes I'll go ahead and fix it so it's easier for people to use it and build up the contributor base and stuff. But that's basically the idea. So I can churn through a bunch of issues pretty quickly by just saying, thank you so much for responding or for filing this issue. Could you dig a little bit more? And the other part of it is too that you want to enable people. So some people aren't used to contributing to open source. They've never done it. And so I have this website called makeapullrequest.com, and
it's your project, right?
Yeah, that's
okay,
me.
Okay. You're everywhere.
Yeah, so that directs people to my free course on Egghead.io about how to contribute to open source. And so I think that's another thing is like we can say, hey, would you like to make a PR? But sometimes people don't even know what PR is. They're like, public relations? Like, what are you talking about?
Okay.
And so if you can make that a link to some resource, then you're enabling that person. So having like a really good contributor.md file so that people know how to contribute to the project, and all of those things are enabling you to be able to even say, would you like to make a pull request? Because otherwise you're just kind of leaving people in a lurch, not knowing what to do to solve their problem. So
yeah, what I tried a couple of times is to write a test which is replicating the issue but not actually solve the problem. So or even sometimes there's a test which is doing almost the same thing, and I'm just pointing the people, here is how to run the test. Here's the test which is really similar to your issue. So just modify the test and let me know, and I'll help fixing it.
Yeah, that's great. Actually, just on that, have you heard of First Timers Only?
First Timers Only? No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so there's this thing that I started back in 2015 called First Timers Only, and it was basically what you described. Like I was working on an issue, and it was really easy. It was like a 2-line source code change, and so I. When I'm doing open source, if I've got most of the time I try to do TDD. So I implemented the test, it failed, and then I fixed the problem with like 2 lines of source code change, and then the test was green, and I was ready to commit it, but I decided not to because I thought that was really easy for me because I know how to do this, but for somebody who's never done it before, that would be a little bit more challenging. So maybe we can use this as an opportunity. So I removed the solution, the test was red, I was using Mocha, so it was it.skip, and I skipped the test. And then I pushed up the skipped test, and I updated the issue and explained in very, very strong detail of what to do to fix the issue on GitHub in a comment. Like unskip this test, and then like copy paste these lines onto like right here, and then it should be green, and push it up. And the whole point was, I don't care about teaching you how to contribute to this code base. I care about teaching you how to contribute to a project on GitHub. And so I give you the very explicit instructions, and then I lock down the issue to only be available for people who've never contributed to open source before. Because anybody who'd contributed before already had that experience of making a pull request and stuff. I didn't care about helping those people contribute. There are other opportunities for them. And so, yeah, then I've done this several times, and this actually has become a thing. If you look on GitHub, look for issues with the label first-timers-only, and you'll probably, I haven't looked in a while, but you'll probably find a couple dozen, if not a couple hundred, issues with first-timers only. And then Scott Hanselman, created firsttimersonly.com because he was also really interested in this, and he and I worked together on that a little bit. So anyway, what you were saying, that's kind of what made me think of this, was creating a test that is failing, and having somebody go fix that test is a brilliant way of getting people to contribute to your project.
Yeah, if I have tested though, this will be nice.
That's another good way to get people to contribute.
or maybe it's another good way to make me actually write tests for the code which I'm writing. Because I, even at work, maybe last year, I kind of stopped doing TDD. I don't know why. Maybe it's. I'm always just before asking people to review my code, I usually write the tests, and even at the stand-ups, for example, I say something like, "Yeah, the ticket is kind of code complete. I just have to write the test." So this is something which I'm saying very often. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's because our code base kind of grows and grows, and sometimes the test. Because we're using React with Redux and Redux Saga, and in order to just write a simple unit test of a component, there is a lot of setup. So sometimes this is really boring for me, so I just leave it like when I'm sure that my solution works, then I kind of write all this big chunk of code and run the tests. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, TDD was... it was nice to me before having so much code. Now it's a little bit,
Yeah, I TDD when I know have an idea of what I want the API to look like. Most of the time for my open source stuff, that's pretty easy. But like if it's a UI component, that's really quite hard to TDD, I think. So I don't often TDD UI, but if it's something like a tool, some Node API or something that I'm writing, then that I generally find it's easier to TDD something like that. But I found sometimes that with TDD you have the red-green refactor cycle, and often people skip the refactor cycle. Because like the refactor, you are supposed to refactor your source code, and I think people are pretty good about that, but they often don't refactor their tests, and that I think can lead to some confusing tests. But even still, I think also this fighting for 100% code coverage is like all of my open source projects are 100% code covered. But the way in which I go about it is not like covering code, it's more covering use cases. And then if there is like a weird situation, then I'll have like a miscellaneous test over here where it's very clear. These are just kind of like, let's just make sure that line actually at least can run in some scenario. But most of the time you should be testing use cases, because otherwise your implementation you start changing your implementations so that you can get 100% code coverage, and that's not good. And that winds up with weird code.
You mentioned something about the API. I actually sometimes when I'm not sure about the API, I want to like see it written on the screen, and the TDD approach was good for me to kind of polish the API. I mean, even just the naming sometimes is like I'm writing the test just to see how I'm going to use this library or a component. So yeah.
Yeah, and there's also like I don't remember who thought of this, but README driven development, where you write the README first. So like, let's say
nice.
This project existed. How would I want to see a project documented? Like, what should the API look like from a documentation standpoint? And then you build the implementation from that. And I think that's a pretty cool idea too.
That's really, really nice. Okay. Yeah, I never thought about this, to be honest. But yeah, interesting. So I know that you're doing lots of teaching, and I myself try to do this, like writing articles. But once I was running a workshop, and even when I'm just doing a talk at some event, I know that teaching someone is actually not beneficial only for the student, for example, but it brings lots of value to me as well. What do you think about this? Because you're doing so many like courses and podcasts and stuff, what do you think about your benefits from doing this?
Yeah, totally. So one of my favorite quotes about teaching is from Ashley Williams. She works at NPM, so lots of people are familiar with her. But it's teaching is nature's way of showing you how sloppy your understanding is. And I think that is like so true, and that's a real benefit. So people will often ask me like, how do you learn so much stuff so quickly? I actually just graduated from college just over 3 years ago. And so I haven't been doing this programming thing for very long. I didn't learn how to program really until I was in my early 20s. So the answer that I give people, I actually have a talk that I gave at Forward.js a couple of years ago called 0 to 60 in Software Development, How to Jumpstart Your Career. And in that talk, I explained that the process of learning for me has gone like, first you consume a bunch of information with newsletters and podcasts and just get a very shallow, surfacey level understanding of the existence of a lot of different things. And then you come up with an idea of something you want to build. And when I started out, that was kind of hard because I'd have to think of an app. But now I have countless ideas of things, whether they be apps or like tools that would make open source easier or something. But you come up with something you want to build, and you use the technologies that you're interested in learning to build that. And then you're going to make like tons of mistakes doing that. You'll learn a lot from that experience. But you really solidify your learning and your understanding by teaching the things that you learned. And so that is like the pinnacle of learning and understanding is by teaching it. And so, yeah, the teaching stuff that I do is in part because I want to like teach people things, and I want to make the things that I teach as accessible as possible for as many people to benefit as I can. But then also the other part is selfish in that I want to learn and solidify my understanding of things. And so teaching is a really, really good way to do that. The other thing is that teaching is also a great motivator for learning. So if there's something that I want to learn and I just haven't made the time yet, I'll commit to teach it to my team or to a conference or something like that. And that will motivate me to prioritize learning that thing because I don't want to let people down. And especially at a conference, I don't want to waste people's money. So that, teaching is a great way to solidify your learning. I can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah, I sometimes when the organizer asks me about my talk idea or the title or the description, I very often say something which I'm really, I know that it's interesting, but I just didn't have time to check. So I say, okay, I'll add this thing, and at this time I have no idea what actually is this about. But I know it's cool, it's interesting. I have a rough idea what's going on there, and I do it for the same reason, just to have basically to invest time in learning this thing. Yeah, that's one of my biggest fears, is actually to end up the talk and in the QA session someone to ask me something about my talk, and I say, oh shit, I don't know.
I didn't prepare that.
Yeah, so yeah, that's completely true. I remember how difficult it was to me to explain how to do a for loop and why we're doing this for loops to absolutely new beginners in JavaScript, and it was pain. It was kind of difficult. Okay, let's talk about React a little bit. You run 2 podcasts about React, or maybe more?
Yeah. So I started React 30 with Michael Jackson and Ryan Florence, and that kind of died off. I think they're eventually planning on starting it up again without me. But yeah, they haven't done anything in quite a while. So yeah, we did like 10 episodes. But yeah, I haven't done a podcast in a little while. I did JavaScript Air, which I sunset just under a year ago, last November. And then I did a year before that, I did Angular Air. And now I have a little podcast called 3 Minutes with Kent. That's a 3-minute long podcast that I just post to irregularly. So yeah, I've definitely done some podcasting, but nothing really active right now.
Okay. When I'm driving, I'm usually listening podcasts. So I was listening React 30. Yeah, didn't download probably the latest episode, but so React became really a game changer, I think, in the front end development. Why do you think it's so popular? I guess one of the aspects is the fact that it's done from Facebook, and it probably gets lots of attention because this is big companies releasing something. Let's see. But yeah, why I think React is so popular?
Yeah, so why is React so popular? I think first off, it's because it's just really, really, really good. And you know, it actually had a bit of an uphill battle when it was first introduced. I think it was at JSConf quite a few years ago now, from Pete Hunt, and everybody just threw up in their mouth when they saw JSX. They're like, what is this? Like, haven't we learned from 20 years of development that this is such a bad idea to do this? But like, people just didn't really understand the power of that, of this idea of co-locating just right in the same file your rendering logic with what it is that you're actually rendering. So yeah, but once people actually just tried it, I remember when I saw it, I was like, this is weird. I don't like that. But I literally spent 5 minutes with it. In the docs, it said, just give it 5 minutes. And so I was like, okay, you have 5 minutes. And I spent 5 minutes and I was like, okay, yep, I'm sold. This is awesome. So I think that if React wasn't just really, really good, people would have tried it for that 5 minutes and been like, yep, my preconceptions were confirmed. My prejudice is confirmed here. I'm just going to move on to Angular 2 or, whatever the next big thing is. But no, it actually is really nice to be able to write components that way. And so, yeah, I think that's a big piece of it. Another thing is that it supports a lot of different platforms, and so it's reaching a lot more people. So it's sure, it is JavaScript. There are also like other languages that can compile to it now, but the fact that you can write native mobile apps with React, and you can write native TV apps with React, and you can write desktop apps with React, and you can do a lot of things with React. And so that is, I think, is really appealing to a lot of people. It gets people who may not be doing web stuff to try it out, and that just increases the popularity of the paradigm, of the concept, and of React in general. So I think that React brought kind of a new way of not really a new way of thinking of UI. I think it wasn't entirely new. I mean, there's not really a whole lot of new stuff under the sun these days. It's pretty much just rehashing of ideas that were brought up in the 80s or even earlier. But it's taking those ideas that were already known and finding an application for them in the language of the browser. And so React just really popularized the ideas of one-way data flow, or I think what's even more important than one-way data flow is just the idea of components, and that like having a clear answer of where state goes, I think is one of the real benefits of React. Is I have this drop-down component, and I need to control the is open state, and I know exactly where that would where I should put that. And then people coming into the code base, if they see there's something broken with the is open state, they know exactly where to look to find where that problem is. And I think that's a really powerful paradigm as well that React has really brought to the forefront, is because I think state is one of the hardest parts of applications in general, and the larger an application grows, the harder that problem becomes. But if you can compose an application of smaller components, then it becomes easier to manage the state problem. And React is really good at breaking bigger applications down into smaller components. And then you say, oh, there's a problem with the state, and I know which component that belongs to, or that state would go in. And so it's really easy to isolate the issue to a component or a set of components, and deal with the state issues that you have. So I think there's a combination of things, but React is really, really good, and I suggest anybody who hasn't tried it to definitely try it.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you were doing a podcast for Angular.
Yeah.
So you probably spent some time like developing with Angular.
A long time.
Okay, so I actually didn't use Angular in production, but a big difference for me from Angular and React in the beginning, because there was a moment where I had to kind of pick a framework, and I wasn't into Angular and I wasn't into React, and I was checking both frameworks, and something which I found later when I started working with React is the fact that all the concepts which I learned there, they're kind of generic patterns and paradigms which I'm able to use even without React. While with Angular, it's more like I spent time learning stuff, but it's kind of in the context of Angular.
Mm-hmm.
And do you see people kind of seeing this, or?
Yeah, totally. People see this. That's one of the things that I really like about React, is that when I'm writing React, I'm learning JavaScript, because I learned all there is to know about React in an afternoon, because the API surface is like really small, and then from there on out it's just JavaScript. Whereas with Angular 1 in particular, I spent 2 years with Angular. And the whole time I was learning Angular, I did learn some JavaScript stuff, but lots and lots of it was domain-specific knowledge that I couldn't transfer, which is a shame, and I will avoid doing ever again. Is I want to work with something that is minimal enough that I can spend more of my time working with the language than I work with a framework. And I appreciate the value of being able to ship things quickly. And with React, you do need to like bring more things in and wire things together, and you need to learn what dependencies are good fit for what situations, stuff like that. But I actually think that I can ship things just as quickly with React, even though I do need to maybe wire some of these things together in some way and have a build and everything like that. But yeah, the tools these days are just so good, and I think that React. One of the things you want to optimize in a code base is changeability or deletability, because that's like there are very few apps that really matter that will never change. And so I think React is really good at being able to optimize for that changeability or that removability. Anyway, yeah, so I think being able to have all of your tools in a single toolbox is kind of nice. And then everybody knows, oh, I'm in an Ember application, so I know exactly how everything works because it's all convention based. So there's a lot of benefit to that. But I just feel like despite that, React is just so incredibly flexible and at the same time simple and minimal that it's worth it to me to have to wire up dependencies myself and have to yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've trailed off of what you were talking about, but that the idea of being able to focus more of my time and attention on JavaScript rather than a specific framework is a huge benefit to using React for me.
Yeah, you mentioned that thing with the wiring, the fact that because React is just like a view layer and you have to do all the other bits by yourself. Sometimes I find this not so nice because it's probably because I'm making wrong choices about using the wrong library or something, or maybe I'm trying to implement something which is already there and it's battle tested and people are using it for months and it's fine. But yeah, I guess this will change with the time. Even with the routing, for example, we all know that React Router is the thing. That's the way to do the routing in your apps. But in the beginning, it was not so obvious. And yeah, I tried myself a couple of things and they end up bad. But yeah, I guess as a downside of React, it's maybe the fact that you have to wire more stuff by yourself, which from my point of view, because I like playing with stuff, I guess it's good. But yeah, sometimes it takes time and it has a price. Yeah, okay. So what do you think about CSS in JavaScript? We mentioned JSX and the people weren't really happy with it in the beginning. Like writing HTML in JavaScript was so weird. What about the CSS in JavaScript? I know that you're doing the Glamorous, right? The project.
Yeah.
So yeah, what do you think about this approach? Like,
well, I think that it's great. So for the same reasons that I'm glad that I'm writing my HTML and my JavaScript, I'm glad I'm writing CSS and JavaScript. In fact, I'm even happier about writing CSS and JavaScript because I think CSS is has even more foot guns than HTML ever did. So being able to have all of the power of a real language and to control the styling of my components is a really nice thing. So often, like when JSX was kind of hit the scene, people would scream, "Oh, separation of concerns! Like, why are you putting that together? It's garbage." And the response is, "Well, actually, no, it's not what you're doing is a separation of technologies, not concerns. So the concerns is the component, and that is my concern." And the component is incomplete without the HTML. It literally is like you can't see anything without the HTML. There's nothing to interact with. Sure, the JavaScript can add some functionality to that, but that's you may as well couple those things together. They're already coupled just by nature of it being a component. So why don't you fuse them together to make it easier to develop. And then if we can make that fast, then you really have no reason to not do that. So that's the idea of JSX. Well, CSS is the same way. Let's say you have a toggle button that shows differently when it's toggled on. So without the CSS, your component is broken. So it's incomplete without the CSS. It doesn't work without the CSS. So they're coupled. You cannot decouple those things. And so why don't you just marry them and fuse them together just like we did with JSX. That's my idea of CSS and JS, is that having them together is just that's what a component is. It's HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. And so that's and then CSS has a lot of footguns, like I'd mentioned, because of the way that the cascade works and everything, and specificity and stuff, the answering the question, can I delete the CSS, is actually really hard in a big application, because I don't know. I have to go to every single page and check all the selectors and see if this one's being used, because some intern, I've done this when I was an intern, computed the class name to apply to this element, and so now there's no way to even grep across the code base for this class name, because it could be concatenating some strings or something. I've definitely seen that. And so what we do is we create conventions to say, okay, don't ever do that, and make your class names this, follow BEM or whatever CSS philosophy you subscribe to, and then you'll never have those problems. Well, conventions are really just us making it up for not having a wide enough pit of success. And a pit of success is how easy is it to do the right thing and how hard is it to do the wrong thing. So if you have a wide pit of success, it's really difficult to do the wrong thing. It's just the natural, it's not impossible, because sometimes you do need escape hatches. You need to be able to touch the DOM in React sometimes. And so you have these escape hatches, but the natural, obvious thing to do, the thing that beginners would do, is the right thing. And so with CSS, the pit of success is very, very narrow. And so we put up these signposts to say the pit of success is this way, follow BEM, put your files in these locations, and whatever the case may be, to compensate for that narrow pit of success. And people don't see those signs, or people are confused by those signs, and so they don't fall into the pit of success. Whereas with CSS and JS, you don't even think about class names, especially with something like with Glamorous, where you're generating or you're creating a component out of some styles, and that component just applies the class name internally. You don't even see the word class name anywhere. And so you don't have to worry about specificity. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff at all. Just the computer takes care of the mundane, and the task that can be easily automated. And you focus on the stuff that it really matters, what it should look like and how it should interact with the user. So the other thing is that with CSS, if you make, let's say somebody makes a CSS only change, and they push a pull request or up and whatever, and you're reviewing that, you really have no idea what impact that CSS change makes. And you're probably not going to pull it down and run the app and make sure that the CSS isn't going to break everything. So you'll probably require that they have a screenshot. But even then, are they going to screenshot every page in the app? No, probably not. So you're CSS only regressions are way too common. And so a solution for that is you render everything to a page, every single one of your components, you render it, and you take a screenshot of every state of that component, and then you do a diff. So the next time somebody makes a change, you take all the screenshots again, you diff those. There are tools that allow you to do this, but they're very flaky, and they're not easy to set up, and they're not easy to run. They take a lot of resources. So that's not really that's a solution, but it's a difficult one. So an alternative to that is if you write your CSS in your JavaScript, then you go ahead and you render, and then you can go look at the style sheet abstraction and say, hey, what CSS has been rendered? and you put that into your jest snapshot. And so now you take a snapshot of the component, like here's the current state, snapshot that, and it'll show you the HTML that would be rendered and the CSS that would be rendered. So you don't see it visually, but you can at least see what impact your CSS only change made on the components in your code base. And you say, oh, you changed the button color to look like this. Well, I just realized because this snapshot was updated that we don't actually want to change the way the button looks like on this page. And that's something that would be really hard to do in regular CSS. And then the idea of being able to delete some CSS or change it becomes really easy because can I delete the CSS? Well, yes, I can because I'm deleting the component that's associated with it. And it's like very clearly it's in the same file. It's not being used elsewhere. And then you can trace dependencies and say, oh, this component's being used here. I'm going to have to either move it or change that. So like adding all of that explicitness just makes like maintaining a code base of components just so much easier. There are fewer foot guns. The pit of success is much wider. It's not perfect, but it's certainly so much better. So those are a bunch of my thoughts and feelings around CSS and JavaScript.
I think the best part is that when people start using CSS and JavaScript, they don't actually realize how much benefits this brings to the team. Because now when you mention all this stuff with the pull request and can I delete this CSS, I actually stopped thinking about this, but I didn't like make a note for this and say, you know what, this is coming because we pick CSS and JavaScript. I just stopped doing all these things, and now I realize that that's actually kind of a benefit of CSS and JavaScript. Mm-hmm. Okay, nice. I don't know how this happened, but we filled 1 hour talking.
I can talk a lot.
No, it's really interesting. So let's say a couple of words about Prettier, because that's kind of a hype right now. We just started using it. So my understanding about Prettier is that it's kind of like a linting, which is amending my code, and when I'm pushing stuff, they are already formatted and everything. Is this the use case?
Yeah. So just to be clear, I didn't create Prettier. That was James Long. And it's an incredible tool. I created Prettier ESLint, which kind of makes the two tools work together in a nice way. But what Prettier is, the use case is it's a couple of things, but one of the major ones is the code form should always be formatted exactly the same. So given this code, it will always be formatted this way, because at least in JavaScript, the format of the code matters absolutely not at all. There's no actual benefit like for the running of the code for whether it's formatted one way or another. So spending your time and your brain energy formatting code is a waste of your very intelligent brain, because it really doesn't matter. So it's a thing that the computer can automate. And we want to automate as many things as we possibly can so that we can focus our brain and our intelligence on things that are actually hard problems. And so that's kind of the idea of Prettier, is that it makes it so you don't have to think for a second about formatting the code. The computer does it for you. I think that's the simplest explanation for why I think Prettier is cool. And the nice side effect of that is I never have to nitpick in a pull request about formatting. Like, you put 2 spaces between the function name and the parentheses. That was just like a mistake. Like, you agree with me. Like, that I'm not having a formatting war about like, oh, I think it should be 2 spaces instead of tabs. Like, that's a totally different stupid conversation. But like, it's really common to accidentally format something weird, and so I'll say, hey, you formatted this kind of funny, could you fix that? But I never have to worry about that anymore because I have Prettier do it. And on top of that, I have Prettier do it as part of a pre-commit hook, and so anything that you're about to commit will get auto-formatted. So you don't even have to do any setup of tooling. You just install the dependencies in the project, and and you're off to the races. So all of my recent projects on open source projects are formatted with Prettier, and I never need to nitpick on style ever, and it's great. So that's really nice. And another thing is, if I like copy and paste some code, I never have to like update the formatting. I just hit save. My editor is integrated with Prettier, and it saves it. Never spend any time formatting code. It can be hard, but yeah, you just let the editor format it for you. And then like sometimes I'll just be writing a really long line of code because I know my editor's going to format it. So I never hit the enter key, and it just gets longer and longer and longer. And then I finish, I hit save, and it all formats. And sometimes I do that on purpose just to watch it do its magic, and it's so cool.
Oh gosh.
I'm nice. Prettier.
Okay, then I'm using Visual Studio Code. I guess there is something for it.
Yeah, there totally is.
Okay.
And there's actually even integration with ESLint there. So what Prettier ESLint does is there are some things that ESLint can do that Prettier can't, and then there are lots of things that Prettier can do that ESLint can't. So for example, ESLint won't auto-fix the max length for you. So if you type a really long line of code, Prettier or ESLint is just going to say, hey, that's too long, and Prettier is going to format it for you. So, but with ESLint, there are some rules that, like if you say prefer const and somebody uses var, you want to switch that to a const if it's not being reassigned, it can be a const. And Prettier is not going to do that for you, but ESLint can do that for you. And there are lots of other things that they can do that that ESLint can do that Prettier can't. So what the idea of Prettier ESLint is, it runs the code through. Well, what it does first is it takes the file that you're formatting, and it uses ESLint to find the associated ESLint config file, and then it infers so Prettier actually has options. You can say, I want tabs instead of spaces, or you can say single quotes instead of double quotes, lots of different options there. And so you configure ESLint for some of these preferences, and then Prettier ESLint will find the ESLint configuration and determine what your Prettier config should be based off of that configuration, and then run Prettier on your code. And then it will take the result of that Prettier run and run that through ESLint with fix. So ESLint has a auto fix functionality. And so any of your custom rules or anything else that you have there it will format the code based off of your custom rules, your custom config. And then it'll give you back the code that's formatted by both Prettier and ESLint. So that's the idea of Prettier ESLint.
Okay, so just after this podcast, I'll write to my colleagues that we should actually use Prettier ESLint, not just Prettier, because we started with just Prettier, and now we are with at this point where we have to decide to use single quotes or double quotes just to agree with something, and we start using it. But we already have a massive ESLint config, which is working fine for maybe a year. So yeah, if you're able to wire this to Prettier, this will be really nice, because we don't have to decide again stuff. It's already in ESLint.
Yeah, the other nice thing about Prettier ESLint as well is that it will honor your ESLint ignore. And so if you have like a directory that you don't care about the formatting or whatever, or node modules or something, then it just won't. It'll skip over that entirely. And so with Prettier, I think there might be a way to specify things you want to ignore. I'm not sure, but with ESLint, you're already saying you don't care about the linting of these files, and so you probably don't care about the formatting either. So it won't format those files.
Yeah, and is it reading the ignores in the files? I mean, sometimes when we're communicating with some API, the data that comes from the API, the naming of the props there is with underscores, for example, and we prefer to be with camel case. But
yeah. So that actually is a rule that's not fixable by ESLint, so you wouldn't need to worry about that anyway. So ignoring certain blocks of code is a little tricky because we're running things separately between the two. And Prettier ESLint doesn't actually do anything to look at the code and skip over portions of it or anything like that. So Prettier has a Prettier ignore flag that you can set to have it not format something, and then you have ESLint ignore. And both of those will be honored, but you have to use both of them if you don't want a certain code to be formatted. So that's a little bit tricky, but I think that there's nothing impossible about making that work. But as you said, the underscore separated variable names and stuff, that's not something that ESLint is going to format anyway. Or fix. So
it's more about the fact that because that's how the API response comes to the JavaScript. We have our own normalization in the code, but because we're doing this normalization manually, we have to write the names of the props with this underscores, and then the linter is like, this is wrong.
Yeah, so that's actually one thing is like Prettier ESLint is not going to fail on warnings or errors or anything like that. It totally ignores those, and all it does is format. So if you have rules that say, hey, this should never happen, then it ignores those warnings and errors entirely, and it just deals with the formatting. So you would still want to have ESLint still in your project to catch those kinds of things, and then the formatting would just be a separate thing.
Okay, so that's the module. Okay. Yeah, thank you for accepting my invitation, being part of my podcast. It was awesome.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun. Always good to chat.
Okay. Bye, everyone.